Thank you for watching, and I hope you stay tuned till the end. I do have a favor. If you can help me identify this wood, please leave a comment and let me know what you think it is. So this is this week's project. First of all, it's just going to be it's going to be a natural edge bowl. And this is what's known as fogwood. I say fog, F-O-G, fallen on ground. I do not know what the species is. It was given to me. It's got a nice tight bark on it, so I think I'm going to be able to leave that on. It seems like it's in good shape. We're going to give it a try. If the bark comes off, then it's not live edge, it's natural edge, and that'll work too. We're going to do it saddle, which means this will be the bottom, this will be the top. You'll see that in a little bit. Here's the pith. I'm going to turn that down, but for now, I'm going to mount it on the bottom and get it round, and then we'll work down to here to get rid of that pith so that it doesn't crack. You see it's got some checking here on the ends. It doesn't go very far. I didn't do anything special with this wood. It was cut last fall, and it's actually relatively dry. I left it outside all winter, and it's actually fairly dry, showing about 15%. It'll be 12 inches in diameter. Again, I didn't cut this, so I'm at the mercy of the people that did. I would have made it this dimension, this direction as well, so I could have got a bigger bowl out of it, but that's fine. 12 inches is still a good sized bowl. So we'll go ahead and get this mounted up on the lathe and start making it round. So as I mentioned, this is fogwood, which means fallen on the ground, which means I really have no idea what the tree looked like. But if you take a look at the bark there, maybe if you have any ideas, leave a comment as to what type of wood you think it is. I think it may be a willow. It seems to be soft-ish and a very white wood, so either poplar or a willow would be my guess. But it did turn nicely. Initially, I'm going to try and leave the bark on, so that means cutting from the top down, which is not typically the way you want to cut. It gives you an unsupported cut. But if you come from the bottom up to the bark, you'll push the bark off. So I did try and save the bark. In the end, as you'll see, I wasn't able to do that, but at least I started out with that in mind. So my goal here is just, at this point, is just make it round, so get rid of these square ends that you see from the chainsaw. I am using my face shield during this point in the turning. The shavings that are coming off are large, and sometimes bark can fly off as well, so I typically wear my face shield during this point, but I always wear eye protection. Even when I'm not wearing my face shield, then at minimum I wear eye protection. This wood also, as I mentioned, is wet, so what's coming off there, it's cutting well, or what's coming off and hitting my hand, because it's wet, means that it's not hot, so I don't need to wear a glove or protect my hand in any way. I'm almost there. On one side, the square edge is pretty well gone, but the other side's got a little bit more, so I'll continue to make it round. Now you can see here it's round. I'm continuing to do a push cut from the top down to the bottom. And that line that you see is probably where I'm going to stop and make my base. Again, I want to get rid of that pith we talked about earlier. So that part is going to be gone. So now that I've got it round, I think you can see the saddle shape forming here. I've come in to where I've gotten rid of the checking that was there. I had to come in a fair ways. I say a fair way is probably 1/2 inch on the outer rim, so that's not that much. It's way too tall. I mean, I want to have a nice curve here, so this is going to come in quite a bit on the base. But I think this is going to be the bottom. I wanted to leave some of this hardwood so that you get this contrast between the dark and the light. Here's a pith here, which I do want to get rid of. But over here, it's further down. Often happens in a tree. The center of the tree doesn't always run straight. So I'm going to make this the bottom of the bowl right here. That's a lot to cut off on the lathe. I'm probably going to turn a tenon on this end, take it out and cut that off with a chainsaw and then finish it up. Just because I don't feel like curving all that down. But it's starting to take shape. We'll go ahead and get a tenon on this end so I can work both ends. Now, yesterday I roughed this bowl out. Pleased with the shape of it. I did that yesterday morning and I left it overnight. Unfortunately, overnight, it's cracked here, here, and here. The wood was wet, I know that. It was cut last fall. And I didn't do anything with it. I just left it as a log. So I don't think that's going to be very deep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this down to get rid of that crack. And then I'm going to finish it in the next setting. Once you get it finished and thin, it's not likely to crack. But right now, it's trying to dry. There's a mass of wood inside. It's trying to move. It can't move, and therefore it cracks. But if I shape it, make it thin, then it'll be allowed to move, which is normal for a wet bowl. And the fact that the rim doesn't appear to be round, it is. We've talked about that in previous channels, previous videos. But the fact that it doesn't appear to be round hides the fact that it's going to go out around anyways. So we'll go ahead, get rid of these cracks, which is unfortunate because this was a finish, well, not quite finished, had a little more sanding to do, but it was a shaped surface. So we'll go ahead and turn those cracks out. So here I flipped it around. I've got it in my chuck, and now I'm going to start hollowing the inside out. Unfortunately, there's not a lot to see from this camera angle. Obviously, because I'm on the inside of the bowl. And even when I switch to the end, it's a little hard to see, but I'll explain it as I'm going. You can see here it's cutting fairly well. I do have my tailstock engaged, and I'm going to leave my tailstock engaged as long as possible. Unfortunately, here you can also see that a fairly large piece of bark flew off. I could try and glue that back in, but I know that I want to go fairly thin on the walls of this, so I really don't think there's much chance of me saving all the bark. So at this point, I've given up on that idea, and we'll end up with just a natural edge bowl as opposed to a live edge bowl. Here when I'm working at the top, I initially started with my carbide tool just to establish the rim. And then once that's established, I'll switch to the bowl gouge because I can ride the bevel. And the bowl gouge, 9 times out of 10, is your best tool at removing a lot of material quickly. Sometimes, depending on the wood, it may not give you the final finish cut, but again, the majority of time will be the fastest at removing bulk material. Hopefully you can see here 3 things really. Number 1, it's cutting well, removing material fairly quickly. Number 2, the walls are getting fairly thin. You can see that as the bowl is spinning around. And then number 3, you can see how I've kept my tailstock engaged. So at this point, I still have a very center piece that I haven't removed. And I'll leave that until I go to pull the tailstock out of the way and just remove that final piece. Now I don't always do this, but I don't know if you can tell, but I stopped a little short on the inside, still a little bit thicker than I need to be, and I'm unfortunately going to have to go back and rework the outside a little bit. Because this wood was wet and I only did the outside the first day, it moved a bit on me overnight. Not very much, I'm talking just a mil or two. So I'm just going to go ahead and round that up, true it up on the outside, and then I'll go ahead and finish the inside. So just an update. Off camera, I sanded it, starting with 80 grit. There was a bit of tear out here. I've gotten rid of that. I did have it come off the lathe. Fortunately, I still had a tenon on the inside, so I mounted it on here, and I was able to clean up my tenon on the bottom, which had broke. So I'm going to finish this outside, because sometimes what happens, as much as you try to get the tenon straight, when you flip them around, they will move a little bit. So, which tends to make the walls a little ununiform as far as thickness goes. I'm done at the top, even on the inside, just need to sand it a bit. Still need to do a little bit of work on the bottom. But I'm going to finish the outside here. It's pretty good. I've got some hand sanding maybe right here on the rim that I got to do. And then I'll do this top surface. Again, the bark has come off, so it will be a natural edge bowl, not a live edge bowl. But I'm pretty pleased with the shape and the way it's turned out. So I'm going to continue to sand for a little bit and we'll flip it around. Here you can see the wood looks like it's got some finish on it, but it does not. I just sanded that to 600 grit and used my abrasive polish. Now there is some wax in that, so that would have darkened it up a bit, but no finish to speak of. Because the bark is gone and the rim is so white, I decided to use my butane torch just to burn the rim a little bit, which just gives it a bit more contrast. And because I've got some finish, that wax on the outside, that will prevent that from burning on the outside and make for easier cleanup. I will do a little bit of sanding on the inside just to remove any scorching that's come from the edge down onto the side. But again, there wasn't very much. That's the advantage of using that small butane torch. So here I'm getting ready to remove the tenon. This is the final step in the turning process. So I just use a friction drive. This tenon, I've got a small divot in the center when I first started turning it. And then I bring the tailstock up, put it into that divot, and that pretty well assures me that I'll be centered. At least I'm centered enough to be able to remove that tenon. I know I've spoken about this on previous videos, but when it comes to removing that tenon, the one thing you want to make sure you do is that you've got a lot of pressure on it, which is in the axial direction, which will help hold it into place. And then make sure that the force you put on it with the tool is also pushing in the axial direction from tailstock to headstock, as opposed to a lot of side loading. It is possible, if you put a lot of force on it in side load position, that you could push this bowl off of it where it's just a friction drive at this point. Because of the shape of this bowl, I typically don't apply a friction finish, a finish that has to be applied on the lathe. So in this case, I'm going ahead with wipe-on poly. Wipe-on poly can be done completely off the lathe, so I don't need it spinning and I don't have to worry about the odd shape. The other thing is, with this white wood, the wipe-on poly is a good choice because it'll give it a bit of gloss. And again, because the wood is so white and plain, the gloss will help just draw out the features in the wood. So I'll do both, inside and outside, and I'll end up probably putting 5 or 6 coats of the wipe on poly. Put very little on, as it says in the name, you wipe it in as much as possible and then let it dry and then come back and apply another finish.